Not every night is meant for sleep. Some are meant for remembering how she unzipped what you never said out loud, how her heels echoed like a heartbeat across your floor, and how her words, written on your back, were never meant to be sent, only felt. Tonight, I'll tell you 3 stories. Each one slips quietly into the room, lays a hand on your shoulder, and doesn't ask before leaning closer. So tell me, what time is it where you are? And who do you wish was beside you tonight? Let the dark hold you, and let me begin. There are rooms in Paris that hold more stories than they hold furniture, and this one, 3 floors above Rue des Martyrs, with its peeling green shutters and a single brass key, was one of them. I didn't come here to remember anyone. I came here to forget the curve of someone else's jaw, forget the way his shirt smelled when they came out of the dryer, and how he never noticed when I wore them out to buy bread. Forget the version of me that always waited. But forgetting is a myth we tell ourselves when remembering hurts too much. The apartment was barely large enough for a bed, a chair, and a kettle. The floorboards creaked in soft protest with every step, as if whispering that it had already seen too much, heard too much. The window overlooked the bakery across the street, and each morning the scent of warm butter would climb into the room like a lover returning without knocking. I liked that about it. It was a space for invisibility, for small rituals that made no noise. Loose hair tied into a bun, a shirt unbuttoned slowly in front of no one. Letters started, never finished. I stayed quiet. Paris stayed quiet with me, until the knock. It was a slow, tentative knock. Not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that asked permission. When I opened the door, he stood there. Not the kind of man you fall in love with at once. The kind of man who looked like he'd been loved deeply by someone else. Maybe too many someones. He wore a grey coat with the collar turned up, and when he took off his scarf, I noticed the faint mark along his jawline, like a past someone had once traced with her lips and left a memory behind. "Pardon," he said. "I think I've the wrong floor." But he didn't turn away. Neither did I. He introduced himself as Mark, the photographer staying 2 floors above. His heater had broken, and the landlady was away for the weekend. Could he perhaps, just for a while, borrow my warmth? I said yes, but not with words. Sometimes we say yes just by not closing the door. He stepped inside, and everything shifted. The air, the rhythm of my own breathing, the quiet. He made tea while I lit candles. We didn't speak much, but we watched each other in the way that people do when they're no longer young enough to be careless, but not yet old enough to be safe. His hands moved slowly, methodically, as if each movement meant something. A man used to being alone, but not untouched. There's a particular kind of silence between 2 strangers in a small room. Not awkward, but aware. "I used to live here," he said, eventually. "Not this apartment, But Paris, years ago, before he didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he sipped his tea and stared at the chipped window frame, as if it could remind him who he used to be. That night, he didn't ask to stay. I didn't ask him to leave. The bed was wide enough for two bodies to pretend they were only there for sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. There's something about another person's breath, the way it fills a space that used to be only yours, that makes the skin remember what it's tried to forget. His coat was draped on the chair, his boots neatly placed by the wall, but it was the zipper of his duffel bag, half open, that drew my eye. Inside, folded too neatly, were shirts, papers, and a photograph, face down. He noticed me looking. He didn't flinch. "I never meant to stay long," he said. "But some nights ask you to stay." And then softly, as if unzipping his past in mid-air, he reached for the photo and turned it toward me. It was him, younger, smiling, his arms around a man I didn't know. The breath caught in my throat, not because of the photo, but because of the way he looked at it, like something had been undone in him long before he met me. "I loved him," he said, "and when he left, I zipped it all away, every part of who I was when I was with him." He touched the zipper on his duffel bag, almost absent-mindedly. "Sometimes I forget what I look like without all this." His voice trailed off, and in that moment, with his past half spilled on the floor and candlelight drawing soft shadows on the ceiling, I moved closer. I didn't reach for his hand. I didn't kiss him. I just whispered, "You don't have to unzip everything tonight." But he did. Not all at once, but in small movements. A button here, a word there. A silence filled. We lay side by side, not touching, but breathing in the same memory. He looked at me, eyes half lost in shadow. "You remind me," he said, "of what it felt like to be held without explanation." And then, quietly, "I don't know if I'm ready to be seen again." I answered without sound, just turned to him and left the lamp on. The next morning, Paris woke up without apology. Light spilled in through the shutters in broken lines, striping the room in warm gold and shadow. The kind of morning light that makes people fall in love with cities they barely know, and sometimes people they don't yet understand. Mark was still asleep beside me, or at least still pretending. He lay on his side, one arm tucked under the pillow, the other resting on the sheets, not reaching, not withdrawing. A man at rest, but not yet safe. I sat at the edge of the bed, barefoot on cool wooden planks, the quiet air wrapping around me like a decision I hadn't made yet. His shirt, the pale blue one, was draped carelessly over the back of the chair. It was wrinkled now, a little soft in the way things become after holding too much skin. The sight of it made me feel something I couldn't name, not possession, not tenderness, just recognition. I made coffee in the tiny French press on the stovetop. He joined me, silently, a few minutes later, shirtless, barefoot, a little more undone than the night before. We didn't speak until we'd both sipped once. Then, without warning, do you ever miss who you were before someone loved you the wrong way? His voice was soft, but not unsure. He wasn't asking for advice. He was asking to be known. I said nothing, but my silence must have sounded like yes. He told me more that morning than he had the entire night before, about how they met at a train station. Typical, he said, almost scripted, about how they didn't last, not because they didn't love each other, but because one of them always loved louder. I stopped laughing the same way after him, he said, staring into his cup. Isn't that strange? That love can reach even into your laugh? I knew what he meant, because I had stopped humming while I did the dishes after mine. We walked along Rue des Martyrs around noon. It had rained briefly, the kind of soft Parisian drizzle that coats the awnings and brings out the ink in old posters. He pointed out a bookstore he used to visit. I pointed out a cat in the window of a flower shop. Nothing important, but everything intimate. Back at the apartment, he offered to help me hang laundry from the little line outside the window. It felt oddly domestic and strangely erotic, watching him handle my clothes with quiet care, as if they held stories he wasn't ready to read. He paused when he lifted a slip of mine, the silk one, the one I hadn't meant for anyone else to touch. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. The silence swelled, thick with tension, not from words, but from possibility. Later, when I came out of the shower, a towel around my body and steam still clinging to my skin, he was sitting at the table, flipping through a book of mine. He looked up. His gaze wasn't hungry, it was reverent, the kind of gaze that says, I remember you, not just now, but how you were before someone asked you to be smaller. I didn't cover myself. Instead, I walked over, slowly, carefully. He didn't touch me, not then. He just said, you look like someone who deserves to be remembered like this. That night, we lay closer, still not lovers, but no longer strangers. His fingers brushed mine beneath the sheets, and I let them stay. He told me about the last letter he never sent, how he wrote it 3 days after the breakup, how he'd kept it folded inside his passport ever since. Never mailed it, never burned it. Maybe I was waiting for someone else to read it. He looked at me. I nodded. He handed it to me. I didn't open it right away. Some things demand ceremony, so I lit a candle, tucked the blanket under my knees, and read it aloud, only once. It was raw, a confession, a plea. I don't know how to stop writing letters to you, even though you no longer read them. At one point, my voice cracked. At another, His hand found my knee beneath the covers. When I finished, he looked at me differently. Not grateful, not ashamed, just released. And then, gently, with all the slowness of someone who had learned to be careful, he leaned in. The kiss wasn't practiced. It wasn't urgent. It was familiar, as if we were kissing for the 5th time, but the first time we truly meant it. That night, we didn't speak after, but his arm around my waist as we drifted into sleep said everything. It said, "You read the letter I couldn't send." And I think, in that moment, we both forgot how long we'd been alone. The third night did not begin with wine. It began with silence. Mark stood by the open window, shirt half buttoned, hands resting on the frame like he was bracing for something, or maybe holding something in. His back was bare where the shirt parted, the muscles tense, like the silence between us had weight. I watched him from the bed, not as a lover, not yet, but as someone beginning to understand the difference between presence and permission. He turned slowly. "Would you help me with this?" he asked, nodding toward the collar, still askew. It felt like a small gesture, but it wasn't. When I stood and crossed the room, his body didn't move. He let me near him, let me touch the back of his neck, where the hair curled just slightly, unkempt, unguarded. I straightened the collar, fastened the last 2 buttons, pressed the fabric down gently, but I didn't step back. Instead, I rested my palm on his chest, over his shirt, over his heartbeat, and I felt it, faster than I expected. Not nervous, just alive. We didn't speak much that evening. We cooked together, something simple: pasta, tomatoes, basil still fragrant from the marché. He insisted on slicing the garlic thinner than necessary, like it mattered. I let him. He poured 2 glasses of water with lemon slices and said it was more refreshing that way. It was. After dinner, he picked up a photo from the mantel, an old one, faded. "Me and my brother," he said. "He lives in Lyon now. We barely speak." "Why not?" I asked gently. He stared at the photo for a long beat. Then, "We remember things too differently. It makes honesty feel like betrayal." I understood that too well. The couch was too small for 2 people, but we tried anyway. He sat. I curled up beside him, my head on his chest. No background music, no city noise, just the occasional rhythm of his breathing and the way his hand absent-mindedly traced shapes on my hip. He wasn't trying to seduce me. He was remembering how to touch gently. Later, as we stood brushing our teeth side by side, something shifted. He met my eyes in the mirror and said, "You don't look away." I spit gently into the sink. "Should I?" He smiled, not flirtatious, not triumphant, just soft. "I don't think I'd let you." When we returned to the bed, something was waiting there. Not tension, that had already passed. Not expectation either. just permission. He sat at the edge, looked at me carefully, then he unzipped his jacket, slowly. Not like someone removing a layer of clothing, like someone unzipping a history. The gesture was delicate, reverent. He set it aside and said, "This was his. I still wear it when I need to feel less like a ghost." I walked over and touched the sleeve. It was worn, soft. It didn't smell like Mark. It smelled like someone he missed. I leaned down and kissed his temple, not as comfort, not as invitation, but as witness. And then he did something that surprised me. He reached for the hem of my top, the loose one I always packed when traveling, but he didn't lift it. He placed his fingers there and waited. "May I?" His voice was a whisper, a vow, not to take, but to receive. I nodded. And in that moment, something unlocked between us. Not lust, not romance, but trust. The kind that only arrives once both people stop hiding their edges. We made love that night, not feverishly, not dramatically, just quietly. The kind of lovemaking that feels like a language only two people in the world speak, and they're whispering. His lips on my neck, my fingers tangled in his hair, the sound of the sheets folding around us like arms. He asked before every button, paused at every clasp, looked at me the entire time, not like he was studying my body, but like he was learning how to stay. After, we lay in the hush, my cheek against his collarbone, his hand resting just below my navel, not possessive, just still there. "I don't usually sleep after," he said. "Me neither," I whispered. He kissed my forehead, then said something so soft, I barely caught it. "I think this is the first time I haven't wanted to disappear after." I closed my eyes, and in that dark, a single thought rose. So don't. He woke before me. I sensed it, not in movement, but in the absence of breath beside mine. When I opened my eyes, the morning light was filtering through the linen curtains, soft and golden, the way it only is in places you don't live in yet. Mark was sitting at the little table near the window, a cup of coffee cradled in both hands. No shirt, just jeans, barefoot, sunlight spilling across his back, warm and slow, tracing every line like a memory it didn't want to forget. I didn't speak, just watched. There was something holy about the way he held the cup, like he was using it to ground himself in something real, or maybe to keep from fading again. He turned after a moment, saw me watching. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes relaxed, like the part of him that always waited for people to leave had just noticed. I hadn't. "Coffee?" he asked. "Only if it's with you." That morning, we didn't rush. He cooked eggs slowly. I stole his shirt and wore it loose, the sleeves too long, the scent too familiar now to be jarring. We moved around each other easily, laughing once when he dropped the salt, and I told him it meant he had to kiss me, for balance, I claimed. He kissed me like it was his last chore before breakfast. And then came the envelope, a thick, cream-colored thing, left by the concierge in the early hours. He stared at it like it might detonate. "What is it?" "My sister," he said, flatly. "Wedding invitation." "You're not close?" He shrugged. "We were, once, before the funeral." I waited. And then, to my surprise, he opened it. A floral embossed card inside. A location, a date, a name, and a +1. Mark blinked twice. Then he turned to me and said, not flippantly, not romantically, just openly, "Would it be too much to ask you to come with me?" I raised an eyebrow. "To a wedding of a sister you don't speak to?" "Yes," I smiled. "Are you asking as your date?" "I'm asking as someone who doesn't want to go alone anymore." I walked to him, took the invitation, ran my finger over the embossed letters, then looked up. "You're sure?" "I've never been more unsure of anything," he said. "But I want you there anyway." That was enough. We didn't plan anything that day. We walked the Seine, bought apricots from a street vendor. He told me stories from his childhood, the ones he used to embellish when trying to impress girls. This time, they came with disclaimers and honesty. I told a woman once that I had a scar from saving a child from a river. "You don't?" I fell off a bike. We laughed. And for the first time, I saw what he must have been like when he wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's grief. That night, we didn't make love. We just lay in bed, his head on my stomach, my hand in his hair. "I think I'm scared," he said. "Of?" "That you're going to leave, and this will feel like a story I told myself." I inhaled, then lifted his chin gently, looked him in the eye. "I'm not a story," I said. "No," he whispered, "but you're the only one I've ever let narrate me." In the quiet, he began to unzip something else, not clothing this time, a memory. "The jacket I gave you, it was his, my partner. He died 5 years ago. Sudden heart failure." I didn't move. He was the last person I let see me, really see me. And after him, I just zipped everything up, tight, silence, and then I didn't mean to open it again, but you didn't ask for anything. You just stayed. I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm here," I said. He rested his forehead against mine, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. We just existed, bare, together, unzipped. Morning came again, and this time, we woke together. We left the apartment a few days later. He gave me his spare key, just in case. In case of what? In case I try to shut the door again. I slipped it into my coat. Then I'll come unlock it. At the train station, just before I boarded, he whispered something into my ear. Next time I see you, I want to unzip something else. I turned. Your past again? No, he said. My future. And with that, I kissed him. Not like goodbye, but like to be continued. The sound of her heels on my floor wasn't loud. Not in the way stilettos are in hotel hallways or marble foyers. It was quieter, softened by hardwood worn smooth by years, and just enough dust to hush the click. But I felt every step, not in my ears, but in my chest. I hadn't expected her that night. Not really. Sure, she said she might stop by, but it was one of those maybe goodbyes, the kind people say when they want to keep the door open, even if they're halfway down the street already. Yet, here she was, Lena, backlit in the hallway, the golden fringe of her coat catching the last of the streetlight, a single drop of water gliding down the edge of her jaw, not from rain, but from the melted ice of the cocktail glass she must have held for too long. She didn't knock. She just looked at me, like I was the thing she came to leave behind. Are you going to say something? She asked. I swallowed. Why are you here? Is that how we greet people now? She stepped in. The heels again. Click, click, click. Slow, deliberate. Not seductive, not angry. Just final. I didn't think I'd still have the key, she said, dangling it in her hand. But it was still on my ring. I almost left it at your door like in those old French movies. But that felt too poetic, and I'm tired of being poetic with you. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. And just like that, she was in again. In my apartment, in my air, in that part of me that hadn't exhaled since she left. She walked past me, straight into the kitchen, like she hadn't been gone for 2 months, like she hadn't left me a note folded under a wine glass saying, "Don't call, not yet." I followed, watched her pour water into the glass I always left on the counter. She remembered. Do you want to talk? I asked. She sipped. I want to sit. We ended up in the living room. She sat cross-legged on the armchair, like she always used to. I stayed on the couch, unsure if proximity still meant invitation. She looked around. Nothing had changed. Same rug, same lamp, same photos on the wall. But the air, that was different. It carried absence. You didn't throw anything out, she said. I didn't know what I was supposed to throw. She gave a dry smile. The memory. You were supposed to throw out the memory. We sat in silence. The kind you don't fill with words because the silence is the conversation. Eventually, she leaned back. I walked to the corner, she said. Past the place where you kissed me for the first time. Past that window where we watched the neighbors argue, then dance, then argue again. She paused. And then I stood in front of this building for 10 minutes, wondering if I'd feel anything. Did you? She looked down. I didn't, until I started walking. And then the sound of my heels on your floor, this floor, it just, she trailed off. I waited. It brought it all back. She stood suddenly, walked over to the record player. Her fingers moved like memory. She found the old vinyl, the one I played too often, the one she claimed to hate, but secretly hummed in the shower. The needle dropped. The scratch came first, then the soft swell of violins. She turned. "We didn't fight," she said. "We didn't cheat. We didn't betray." "No," I agreed. "We just stopped." I nodded, and somehow that felt worse. She walked toward me, the click of her heels again, deliberate, echoing. And then, without asking, she sat beside me, not touching, but close. Her perfume hadn't changed, that mix of bergamot and something powdery, vintage, a scent that never belonged to now. "I wore these," she said, pointing to her heels, "because I thought if I left tonight and you never called, at least I'd know you remembered what I sounded like when I walked away." I closed my eyes. She was too much, too exact. "You don't get to walk away again," I said, voice rougher than I intended. "I didn't say I would." "You didn't say you wouldn't." She faced me fully now. The space between us was a breath, no more. "Then ask me to stay." Silence. Then, carefully, deliberately, "Stay." Her eyes didn't soften, but her shoulder dropped, the tension gone, like she'd been waiting for those words for too long. She leaned in, and I knew this wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reset. It wasn't even love. Not yet. It was memory. It was want. It was two people finding the echo of what used to be and letting it echo again. Not louder, but clearer. She kissed me, not the way lovers do after dinner, the way memories do when they forget they're not allowed to come back. And when her heel slipped off, the right one, always first, and hit the floor with a soft thud, I knew this wasn't just nostalgia. This was her trying to say, "I remember the floor. I remember you. Let me walk in again." Not to leave, but to stay until morning. The sound of her heels on my floor wasn't loud. Not in the way stilettos are in hotel hallways or marble foyers. It was quieter, softened by hardwood worn smooth by years, and just enough dust to hush the click. But I felt every step, not in my ears, but in my chest. I hadn't expected her that night. Not really. Sure, she said she might stop by, but it was one of those maybe goodbyes, the kind people say when they want to keep the door open, even if they're halfway down the street already. Yet, here she was, Lena, backlit in the hallway, the golden fringe of her coat catching the last of the streetlight, a single drop of water gliding down the edge of her jaw, not from rain, but from the melted ice of the cocktail glass she must have held for too long. She didn't knock. She just looked at me, like I was the thing she came to leave behind. Are you going to say something? She asked. I swallowed. Why are you here? Is that how we greet people now? She stepped in. The heels again. Click, click, click. Slow, deliberate. Not seductive, not angry. Just final. I didn't think I'd still have the key, she said, dangling it in her hand. But it was still on my ring. I almost left it at your door like in those old French movies. But that felt too poetic, and I'm tired of being poetic with you. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. And just like that, she was in again. In my apartment, in my air, in that part of me that hadn't exhaled since she left. She walked past me, straight into the kitchen, like she hadn't been gone for 2 months, like she hadn't left me a note folded under a wine glass saying, "Don't call, not yet." I followed, watched her pour water into the glass I always left on the counter. She remembered. Do you want to talk? I asked. She sipped. I want to sit. We ended up in the living room. She sat cross-legged on the armchair, like she always used to. I stayed on the couch, unsure if proximity still meant invitation. She looked around. Nothing had changed. Same rug, same lamp, same photos on the wall. But the air, that was different. It carried absence. You didn't throw anything out, she said. I didn't know what I was supposed to throw. She gave a dry smile. The memory. You were supposed to throw out the memory. We sat in silence. The kind you don't fill with words because the silence is the conversation. Eventually, she leaned back. I walked to the corner, she said. Past the place where you kissed me for the first time. Past that window where we watched the neighbors argue, then dance, then argue again. She paused. And then I stood in front of this building for 10 minutes, wondering if I'd feel anything. Did you? She looked down. I didn't, until I started walking. And then the sound of my heels on your floor, this floor, it just, she trailed off. I waited. It brought it all back. She stood suddenly, walked over to the record player. Her fingers moved like memory. She found the old vinyl, the one I played too often, the one she claimed to hate, but secretly hummed in the shower. The needle dropped. The scratch came first, then the soft swell of violins. She turned. We didn't fight, she said. We didn't cheat. We didn't betray. No, I agreed. We just stopped. I nodded. And somehow, that felt worse. She walked toward me, the click of her heels again, deliberate, echoing. And then, without asking, she sat beside me, not touching, but close. Her perfume hadn't changed. That mix of bergamot and something powdery, vintage, a scent that never belonged to now. I wore these, she said, pointing to her heels, because I thought if I left tonight and you never called, at least I'd know you remembered what I sounded like when I walked away. I closed my eyes, She was too much, too exact. "You don't get to walk away again," I said, voice rougher than I intended. "I didn't say I would." "You didn't say you wouldn't." She faced me fully now. The space between us was a breath, no more. Then asked me to stay. Silence. Then, carefully, deliberately, stay. Her eyes didn't soften, but her shoulder dropped, the tension gone, like she'd been waiting for those words for too long. She leaned in, and I knew this wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reset. It wasn't even love. Not yet. It was memory. It was want. It was two people finding the echo of what used to be and letting it echo again. Not louder, but clearer. She kissed me, not the way lovers do after dinner, the way memories do when they forget they're not allowed to come back. And when her heel slipped off, the right one, always first, and hit the floor with a soft thud, I knew this wasn't just nostalgia. This was her trying to say, "I remember the floor. I remember you. Let me walk in again." Not to leave, but to stay until morning. 3:41 a.m. The light from the hallway poured across the bedroom floor like melted gold. It clung to her legs as she walked, heels back on, her shadow stretching behind her like a promise half kept. She hadn't said another word after slipping them on, and maybe that was her way of saying what mattered most. Some people write letters. Lena walked across old wood floors in silence, letting the sound do the writing. Click, click, click. I watched her from the bed, shirtless, knees pulled toward my chest, suddenly cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Each step she took was deliberate, but not away. She wasn't leaving. She was circling back to something, to us, to the version of herself that still existed here, between the window light and the coffee stain on the dresser that never came out. "You never changed the rug," she said, looking down. "It was yours," I answered. "You said it scratched your feet." "I got used to it," she smirked. "You got used to a lot of things." I didn't answer, because she was right, because we both did. She knelt down then, right there, on the rug we used to lie on after wine and late dinners and slower kinds of affection. She pressed her palms flat against it, closed her eyes, took a breath. "I imagined this moment so many times," she said, "but in none of them was I brave enough to sit here." "Why now?" She looked up. "I think it's because I don't need you to tell me I was right. I just need to know you remember it with me." I slid out of bed, walked slowly to where she knelt, and without speaking, I sat down beside her, cross-legged, like children, like confessions waiting to happen. We didn't touch, but our knees were nearly brushing, and in that closeness, something inside me cracked open. "I thought I'd forgotten how it felt," I said. "The way your silence sounds when it's not angry, just full." She turned to face me. "My silence was always louder than my words." "You never needed to say much," I said. You always listen too closely. A beat, and then she reached out. One hand, not grabbing, just resting. Fingers spread across the space between us, like an invitation I didn't have to RSVP. I met her halfway. My hand touched hers, not laced, not gripped, just there. Do you remember the afternoon you told me you loved me without saying it? She asked. I smiled, almost laughed. You mean the train station? She nodded. You adjusted my scarf. You looked at me like you were learning my face for the last time. And then you said, I continued, text me when you miss me, or even before. She laughed, quietly, almost tearfully. That was it. That was the moment. And I remember thinking, if this man ever leaves, I won't be angry. I'll just carry him. She was carrying me now, in the arch of her spine, in the way her feet flexed inside those heels like she was holding her balance, not from movement, but from memory. You never really left, did you? I asked. She looked down. I think I tried, but your voice stayed in places I didn't expect. Like where? My throat, my mirror, my lock screen, even after I changed it. It was too much, so I leaned in. Not to kiss her, not yet, just to rest my forehead against hers. And in that space, that microscopic distance between breath and skin, I felt everything I hadn't let myself feel in 61 days. Longing, anger, hope. That terrifying, irrational hope that maybe we hadn't ruined it beyond return. She pulled back first. You said you wouldn't kiss me this time. I didn't. You were about to. I was remembering, I said. She nodded. I remember too. Then she stood, walked into the kitchen. I followed, of course, because when someone returns to your home barefoot and aching, you follow them into every room, just to make sure they know they belong. She took down a mug, the chipped one she used to claim. It still had the faint outline of lipstick inside the glaze. You kept this? She asked. You always said tea tasted better in it. It doesn't, she said. I know. We both smiled, then silence again. But this one was softer, like the hush before a record starts, like breath drawn before a story begins. She placed the mug down, turned, and finally she asked, Do you want me to stay until morning? My voice caught. Do you want to? She stepped toward me. I want to stay until it feels like the night never ended. And so I stepped aside, let her pass, watched her heels click gently down the hallway, now quieter, but still full of presence, like an echo that didn't want to fade. She left the bedroom door ajar, and I knew that we weren't done yet. Not tonight, maybe not ever. 4:17 a.m. The bedroom curtain fluttered in the breeze, letting in a half moon and the hum of the city starting to stir again. She lay on her side, facing the wall, one heel still on, one discarded. Her blouse, unbuttoned but not removed, revealed just enough to say she didn't plan to fall asleep. And I was still awake. I was always still awake when it came to her. Lena didn't ask for a blanket. She didn't ask for a pillow. She simply slipped beneath the sheet, halfway, and lay there as if memory had a weight all its own, and she was too tired to hold it alone anymore. There was a shape in the room, not just of her body, but of something older, a rhythm, a ritual. The way her fingers tapped on the mattress like she was recalling the cadence of things we never dared speak out loud. "You're not asleep," I whispered. She didn't turn. "No." "Cold?" "No." She reached back blindly and found my wrist, pulled it forward until it rested against her waist. "You can hold me," she said, "but not like I'm yours." My throat tightened. "Then how?" "Like I'm someone you almost forgot, but suddenly remembered completely." So I did. I wrapped an arm around her as the curtain fluttered again, felt the slope of her ribs rise and fall. The air smelled like her hair, like something between citrus and static. And it hit me that this was what I'd missed. Not the kisses, not even the nights, but the scent of closeness, the gravity of two people still orbiting something unspoken. Her fingers found the edge of the bedsheet. She slid it down further, not shy, not seductive, just honest. The curve of her lower back met the cool air. Her skin brushed my palm, like permission unspoken. I traced a slow line there, from waist to hip, from yesterday to now. She didn't flinch, didn't lean in either. She let it happen, like someone letting the rain fall after a long drought, not needing it, but no longer avoiding it. "I never slept with anyone else," she said suddenly. My breath caught. I could have. People tried. I waited. But no one ever made the room feel this quiet. Her voice broke there, just slightly, and I realized that this was her version of vulnerable. Not tears, just honesty, half whispered and half heard between the breaths that always filled the silence more than our words did. I sat up, looked down at her. She finally turned to face me, eyes half lidded, lips parted, that one shoe still on. It was the kind of gaze lovers give when they've just let go of pretending. And I asked the question that had hovered all night. "Why tonight?" She didn't hesitate. "Because you were the only one who never asked me to stay, but made it impossible to leave." And then, with that same fragile certainty, she pulled me toward her. No rush, no performance, just warmth, heat where there had once been tension. She kissed me like she remembered the shape of my breath, like her lips had memorized the topography of my skin, like the space between us had been holding its breath all this time, waiting for its turn to exhale. We didn't sleep. We didn't undress everything, but we undressed enough to remember. enough to know we hadn't imagined the way we used to feel. 6:02 a.m. The sun found the windowsill. Lena stood by the mirror, barefoot now, one heel on the floor beside her. She looked at herself, adjusted her hair, and met my gaze through the reflection. "I can't stay," she said softly. "I know. But I didn't come to stay. I waited." She turned. "I came to let the past feel warm again." I walked her to the door. Her fingers grazed the frame, and for a second, just one, she leaned her forehead against it. A sigh, a memory, a moment etched into the paint. Then she faced me. The hall light turned her eyes into a color I hadn't seen in weeks. "I won't text," she said. "I won't wait," I replied. We smiled, the kind of smile that knows something beautiful has ended, but didn't die. She stepped out, heels clicking once more, this time further away. But not final, just distant, like the memory of warmth on skin hours after the touch. 6:08 a.m. I returned to the bedroom. The scent of her lingered, citrus, and something else, a whisper, a promise, not to return, but to never really leave. And so I lay back in bed, the sheets still warm where she'd been, and I listened to nothing, to silence, to the soft echo of her heels in my memory, growing quieter, but never truly fading. It began on a night when the rain refused to fall, but the sky still felt heavy, and so did we. She came in without knocking. Again, no umbrella, no jacket, just that linen blouse she always wore when she wanted to feel small. Her hair damp from the air, her eyes unreadable, and her hands, not shaking, but tight around something folded 3 times. She didn't speak when I opened the door, didn't even look me in the eye, just stepped inside, walked past me like she'd been there yesterday, and paused at the writing desk we both once made love on. She dropped her bag, took off her shoes, then turned. "Do you have any ink?" she asked. "Not a pen, not a marker. Ink. The kind you dip something into, the kind that stains." I didn't ask why, just opened the drawer and handed her the small glass bottle I used when I still thought writing would save me. She took it without a thank you, and then she did something I never expected. She walked over to me, stared, then lifted the hem of my shirt, slowly, and whispered, "Lie down." I lay flat on my stomach. The bed still smelled like memory, her memory. She climbed onto the mattress with her knees on either side of my hips, her thighs warm, her breath warmer. I felt the slight tug of her palm pressing between my shoulder blades. Then her voice, barely audible. "I'm going to write something you're never supposed to read." I exhaled. "What if I want to?" Her pause was long. "Then I'll have to ruin it." The ink brush dragged softly across my spine, deliberate, slow. She wasn't writing words. She was carving feelings. I could feel every loop, every dot, every sharp curve of guilt and longing and shame wrapped in cursive. Her fingers steadied my skin. Her breath tickled the back of my neck as she leaned in, closer with every sentence. She didn't speak, but I could feel the paragraphs forming. The air smelled like ink and skin, a kind of intoxication no candle could fake. She shifted slightly, sliding the side of her thigh further into mine. My breath deepened, but I didn't move. This wasn't sex. Not yet. This was storytelling, one line at a time, with my back as the page. She painted the word almost between my ribs. Then, forgive, just below my left shoulder. And somewhere near my waist, she wrote, if only you'd stayed quiet longer. I don't know how long she went on, 10 minutes, 20, but with every brushstroke, the heat of her thoughts poured into me. A letter I couldn't read, but understood completely. Then she stopped. I felt her pause at the base of my spine, ink still in her fingers, weight still on my hips, and in the quietest voice she said, I never sent this. I turned, slowly, not to smear it. Her thighs still astride mine, she looked down at me, ink-streaked fingertips, blouse unbuttoned just enough to tempt truth, and her eyes, not sad, not angry, just full, like she'd poured too much into me and didn't know how to ask for anything back. I reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her face tilted toward the touch, like she wasn't used to being handled softly anymore. You can read it, I whispered. She shook her head. No, you're supposed to feel it. Her lips hovered above mine, but she didn't kiss me. Not yet. Instead, she leaned forward, pressed her forehead to mine, and exhaled. A shiver ran through her. Then she whispered, if I kiss you, I'll stay. I held still. The ache between us was so loud I could hear it. But if I don't, she added, I'll wonder if you ever felt it too. I wrapped my arms around her slowly. Her ink-stained fingers rested at the nape of my neck, and I said the only thing that ever mattered. I did. And then she kissed me. And it wasn't a kiss of hunger, but of memory, of sentences long forgotten, of things we never said, now written on skin. And in that moment, as her blouse fell and her breath tangled in mine, we were both the letter, unread, unsent, but undeniable. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did I, but we pretended. Her body curved behind mine, a memory folded into the present, the sheets still warm from before. Her palm resting flat on the spot where she'd written forgive. I felt her fingers twitch in the dark, as if the ink still spoke to her, as if her thoughts weren't done writing. The night didn't move, neither did we, but inside me, everything was shifting. There's something about being touched where words used to hurt. It changes how silence feels. Around 3 a.m., I felt her lips against the back of my neck, soft, unhurried, like punctuation after a letter that was never meant to end. Then her whisper, "I didn't think you'd let me stay." I didn't answer, not with words. I turned slowly, letting the sheets pull taut between us. Her hair spilled across my chest, her eyes still uncertain. And then I did what I hadn't done in over a year. I pressed my lips to the tip of her shoulder, right over the line where the ink had smudged in the night. Her breath caught. "Do you remember what I wrote there?" she asked, almost teasing. I shook my head, lying. She smiled, barely. "Good. It was meant for you, not for memory." We didn't make love again. We did something quieter. She placed my hand on her hip, guided it down to where linen met skin, and held it there, not for friction, but for familiarity. Then she whispered, "Let me write the ending." She straddled my stomach again, not with heat, but with intent. Took my hand, guided it to her chest, then placed it flat. Beneath my palm, her heart, beating too fast for someone pretending to be calm. She closed her eyes. This is where it should have stopped. I didn't understand. What should have stopped? She looked down at me, the corners of her eyes glassy. My apology, my trying, my asking to be forgiven when we both broke it. And then she picked up the ink again. Not the bottle, just her finger. And with the tip of it, she began tracing on my chest. Invisible letters this time, silent, deliberate, not in English, in memory. Each curve she drew felt like breath. Every circle, a wound. Every line, a thread being pulled loose. And then she whispered what she wrote. "It wasn't that I didn't love you." She drew a second line. "It was that I loved you too much to stay and let you become the reason I disappeared." Silence, except for the sound of ink drying on our skin, somewhere under the moonless dark. Then I spoke, very carefully. "Do you still want to disappear?" Her answer wasn't in words. She kissed me again. Not the lips, the chest, right over where she'd written. And I could feel her breath tremble. She didn't want to disappear. She wanted to be forgotten slowly, like perfume on bed sheets. But not yet. We lay like that for what felt like hours, her body half asleep on mine, my hands unsure whether to hold or to memorize. Just before dawn, I caught her watching me, eyes wide open, not afraid, but exposed. And I whispered, "Do you want to send it now?" She blinked. "The letter?" I nodded. She shook her head. "No, I want you to carry it." It was a strange thing to hear, but in that moment, I understood. It wasn't a letter for the world. It was a weight, a promise, a confession. And she wanted it tattooed, not mailed. She reached for my hand again, lifted it, pressed it to her lips, then placed it slowly between her thighs. Not for heat, but to remind me this too was part of the story. The part where two people say things without saying them, where skin replaces ink, and breath becomes the reply. And so I kissed her again, this time not for memory, but for now. Morning didn't arrive with light, only with breath. Her skin still rested along mine, warm, unwilling to retreat. But something in her fingers had changed. The way they curled, not in need, but in memory, as if she was already preparing to let go. We didn't speak, not because we had nothing to say, but because we were both afraid to name what had returned. The sun began to rise slowly, brushing against the sheer curtain in gold, then amber, then nothing. Her silhouette was still next to me, but her thoughts had wandered. I watched her. She sat up, bare back to me, hair in tangles like the rest of the night. The curve of her spine still bore the shadows of words she hadn't finished writing. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached for my shirt on the floor, slipped it over herself like a memory borrowed, turned to face me with that look, the one I used to hate because it always came before she left. I made coffee, she said, soft, like she'd never left at all. I followed her into the kitchen, not for the coffee, but to feel the silence fill up the space between us. She leaned against the counter, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug she didn't used to know. I stood opposite her, shirtless, raw, exposed in ways skin had nothing to do with. And then, "Do you still write about me?" Her voice was almost amused, almost scared. I blinked. "No," I lied. She smirked. "But you think of me when you do." That wasn't a question. I wanted to say no. Wanted to say she was just a story I'd stopped reading. But we both knew better. Her kiss still lingered on my chest. Her scent clung to my pillow. "Do you want me to be just a chapter?" she asked, eyes not meeting mine. "I want you to finish the story," I said. Her mug stopped midair. She looked at me like I'd given her a choice she'd never been brave enough to ask for. "I don't know how," she whispered, and I walked toward her, took the mug from her hands, placed it on the counter, held her fingers, both of them trembling now. "You start with the part you were too afraid to write." She didn't speak, but her body leaned into mine, and in the middle of a kitchen filled with silent sunlight and unsent things, she kissed me. Not a kiss for comfort, not a kiss for memory. A kiss for now. A kiss like a truth she never mailed. And this time, when she pulled my shirt off her shoulders, it wasn't with hesitation. It was with reverence, like she was peeling away everything that had kept her from speaking. She pressed my hand to her chest, then down, then lower, then stopped. Only if you still want me. She didn't mean sex. She meant all of it. The ache, the confusion, the way her love was never quiet enough to stay, but never loud enough to leave. And I answered the only way I knew how. I kissed her scars, the real ones, the ones inside, ran my hands along the map of her, held her like she was a letter I'd written in a dream, and finally got to read. The rest was quiet, no sharp breaths, no urgency, just skin on skin, paper to paper, flesh reading flesh. Afterward, she rested her cheek on my chest. We lay tangled on the floor, between a half-drunk coffee and sunlight too honest to ignore. Then she whispered, "I was wrong." I tilted my head. "About?" "I thought I came back because I missed the way you touched me." She looked up, eyes soft. "But it was never the touch. It was the way you listened when I couldn't speak." And I realized then, the letter on my back had never needed ink. It had only needed silence deep enough to hold her truth. She kissed my shoulder, then the side of my neck, then placed her lips against the center of my chest, as if sealing something. "I want to stay," she said. "Not forever, not yet, but for the next story, if you'll have me." I held her tighter, because in that moment, she wasn't a memory. She was a paragraph I hadn't dared write, a sentence I didn't know I'd been waiting to finish. We stayed like that until the shadows shifted, until the light moved away from the floor, until we could pretend again that time hadn't passed. She stayed through the morning, through the coffee turning cold on the counter, through the sun crawling over our skin like a hand we'd missed. We didn't speak much that day. There was something about silence that made everything feel sacred again. She wore my old cotton shirt, the one with the frayed collar, and moved through my space like she had never left. Like her absence had just been a long, inconvenient breath. By late afternoon, she was writing again, at the little desk by the window, where I used to watch her bend over journals with her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth. She hadn't asked to use it, just picked up the same black pen I used for everything, touched the edge of a yellowing page, and began. This time, though, she didn't ask me to read it, and I didn't ask, because whatever she was writing wasn't for the past. It was for the part of her that was still catching up to this room, to us. I watched her instead, her fingers, the furrow of her brow, the soft parting of her lips when she was thinking too hard. I should have known, should have felt it, that she was writing her goodbye before I could stop it. When the rain came, it came gently, the way summer lets go of itself without trying to be dramatic. She moved to the bed and lay down beside me, her writing tucked under her thigh like a secret. She let her fingers wander across my shoulder, not possessively, not needfully, just as if to memorize the shape of what she couldn't take with her. We made love again, but not like before. No urgency, no rekindled hunger. This time, it was unspoken ceremony, a closing of the distance between who we'd been and who we never got to be. When I fell asleep, I dreamt of her beside me, still riding, still naked, still unsure. But when I woke, she was gone. I called out, checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the balcony where she used to leave her tea half drunk and whisper poems to the wind. Nothing. Only the soft dent in the pillow beside me and the faintest scent of her hair on the sheets. And a letter, folded twice, laid on my back. No envelope, no name, just a single line on the outside, in the slanted script I'd once learned by heart. To the man who never asked me to stay, but always made it hard to leave. I read the first line 3 times before I had the courage to read the rest. I didn't know how to say goodbye without it sounding like I was running again. But maybe I am. I always was. From you. From myself. You weren't the one who let go. I was. And that's why I kept coming back. Hoping you'd hold tighter. Hoping I'd be brave enough to stay. Last night wasn't a mistake. It was the truth I'd been avoiding. You still know me. Better than anyone. Maybe too well. And I still love you. In that quiet way that never needed to be loud. But I need to go to figure out what part of me is still mine. And if I ever find a version of myself brave enough to return, I hope you're still writing, because I'll be reading yours even when I'm not here. E. I didn't cry, not then, not for hours, only when I sat at the same desk she had written at, opened my journal, and realized I had nothing left to write that she hadn't already said better. But I didn't burn the letter, didn't hide it in a drawer. I pinned it carefully to the corkboard above my desk, next to a black and white photo of her I had forgotten to take down. And that night, when I lay alone in bed, I turned on my side, felt the pillow still slightly warm from memory, and whispered her name once, just once. The next morning, I wrote her back, didn't send it, just left it in the journal. But I wrote it, because sometimes love is just that, a letter no one gets to read, a truth only the silence hears, and maybe, someday, she'll come back, not for the story, but for the sentence she never finished.